Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to At the Forefront. I'm delighted to be joined today by Colette Turner, who is the founder and CEO of Conversation Over Borders. She is an expert in the area of asylum seekers and refugees, and set up the charity a number of years ago, which we'll ask her a bit more about in a moment. But I just wanted to start by giving you a quick overview. Asylum seeking, as you know, I'm sure, it's a very isolating experience, and asylum seekers are often housed in places, or almost always housed in places that are very overcrowded, often with quite unsanitary accommodation, and they're given extremely small amounts of money on which to live and to experience their new country. At the moment, it's £49 a week that they are given to live on. That includes buying all of their own food. So it is not surprising that many of them really struggle to make connections on top of the language barriers, and also fears of racial discrimination and racial hatred, which, following what happened in the summer, everyone will be aware is extremely live issue. 61% of asylum seekers report, in fact, having experienced severe mental distress. So Conversations Over Borders solutions is to support people who've been forcibly displaced by sharing experience with the wider public to campaign for a fairer UK. They offer one-to-one online befriending, English classes, mental health support, and digital access and inclusion. And they bring people together to spark cross-cultural conversations. Their results are pretty impressive. In 2023 alone, they supported nearly 6,000 English conversation classes. They worked with 172 households, connecting them with tech and de-excluding them from digital exclusion, if that's a way to put it, and helped 191 asylum seekers access wellbeing support. And 100% of the English and befriending volunteers enjoy the experience of working with them. So, Colette, I'd love to ask you now, give us a little bit of information about your background and how it was that you came to set up Conversation Over Borders.
So, hi everyone, thank you so much for having me here, and sorry for the slightly disconcerting light in the background, but it's great to be here. So I have quite a mixed background of different things, both working in film, working in humanitarian aid. So I spent some time in Samos working kind of with refugees and asylum seekers who were arriving onto the island at quite an early point in their journey to the UK. And then also working in mental health. So kind of that is what led me into Conversation Over Borders, a number of different things all colliding. But predominantly what kind of started the organisation was that I was working, volunteering in mental health, running a lived experienced PTSD support group in Brighton and Hove, working with people who were all refugees and asylum seekers who were experiencing PTSD and depression. And I'd been doing that for about 3 years at the time when COVID hit the UK and we went into lockdown. And my kind of first reaction was, you know, the physical effect that we're going to see from this pandemic, but also the mental impact that it's going to have, and the fact that it was kind of likely to be a mental health disaster, particularly for the people that I was working with who were already incredibly isolated from the wider UK. And kind of, as you mentioned, Mary Rose, people are housed in initial accommodation sites or in temporary or emergency accommodation where they exist quite segregated from the rest of the society. So a lot of the people that I knew in that group would spend as much time out of their accommodation as possible, you know, and at the point of COVID, obviously all of those organisations closed their doors and people had to stay at home. So I spoke to the group and I said, okay, we can move the support group online, but what else can I do? Can I organise during this time? And without fail, everyone said English classes. They all wanted to improve their English because English is such an important skill for people to have in terms of accessing employment, accessing further education, and also just being able to converse with people in the wider community in the UK. We are notoriously a country that doesn't tend to speak that many other languages. So when people have other first languages, it's really important for them to learn and speak English here. And I have no English teaching background whatsoever. But at that time, I was doing a master's degree and I knew a lot of students who did. So I began on a very like personal basis, pairing up people who I thought would get along to tutor English and to just make friends for an hour or two a week, every week. And some of those first pairs still meet weekly now, 4.5 years later. But obviously in that time have moved from this kind of tutor-learner relationship into just being friends. And as we kind of came out of the lockdowns a couple of years later, we had this real conversation about whether to kind of move more of our services in person. And ultimately, the demand was that we keep them online because people who are in the asylum system are so often dispersed around the country. And having like a consistent relationship with someone who's on the other end of a Zoom call that lasts beyond all of those dispersals and is really long term was really beneficial for people's social connection and just a sense of stability during quite a turbulent time.
Colette, thank you. That's a great introduction. I apologize, by the way, the next door, it sounds like building works have started up just as we started this interview, so I hope it's not affecting your sound too much. Tell us a bit more about Conversation Over Borders' programs now that you're running and exactly, how it works, basically.
Mm-hmm. So our largest program is still that founding program. It's called English and Befriending. So it's pairing up kind of a nationwide community of volunteers and learners who are people who've been forcibly displaced, who meet. It's all about reducing isolation, practicing English, building up people's confidence. But then from that point and in a very organic way, we started seeing through feedback on that project, demand for other areas of work. And so one of those was actually because we retained most of the programming online, people were kind of coming to us and they would have like lost internet access once they'd been dispersed somewhere else that didn't have Wi-Fi, or they didn't have a phone. There was a period of time when the Home Office under Priti Patel were routinely confiscating people's phones when they arrived by a small boat. So we were seeing a lot of people arriving who had no access to the internet at all. And if you think about how much I expect everyone here has probably used their phone today for everything from, navigating to work or, like calling the GP or even maybe joining the school. It's kind of obvious that we live in such a digital age and that people kind of need access to the internet now to orient themselves and to access core services like healthcare, and to be able to get to know like other people and stay in contact with friends and family. So we launched a digital inclusion project where we take, initially it was individual donations of phones and laptops and tablets. And over time, we've progressively partnered with corporates who are refreshing their tech and they donate their secondhand technology to us. And then we have an in-house team who refurbish the tech, wipe it all securely of data, and then redistribute it to people that are digitally excluded with internet connection. So SIM cards usually that are preloaded with 25 gigabytes a month. But actually very, very recently and not yet publicly announced, so you guys are getting the first news, we've partnered with Jangala, who are providing us with get boxes, which are essentially Wi-Fi hubs for people's houses and also for the initial accommodation hotels because they rarely have a stable internet connection. So that was all about helping people get online. We have a digital skills course launching in January, which will also be about kind of equipping people with the skills that they need to move from fundamental digital skills all the way into digital employment. So roles like coding, and we're doing that through a great partnership with an organization called IDEA, who offer like digital skills modules specifically to get people into digital jobs. So again, things like coding. So that's one project that arose from a need in the community identified through the English and Befriending programme. And the other reason that we were seeing people drop out of that programme was due to mental health, which obviously, given my background, was something that I was very aware of. And the English and Befriending programme was very much about improving mental health without being called a mental health service. But we became aware over time that we needed to be offering kind of more mental health interventions. And what makes the service unique is offering mental health interventions that are led by people with lived experience and that have trained in mental health in their countries of origin, because all countries across the world have a very different kind of perception of mental health, a different way of understanding it. And we have a very Western view of mental health in the UK, but for some people who don't speak English very well, or like have fundamental English, accessing counselling in English is really challenging. And also accessing mental health support where perhaps like religious or cultural differences make it not really like aligned with what they need. It felt really important that we offer culturally sensitive mental health support in people's first languages. So we run several peer support groups that are predominantly designed and led by people with lived experience. These include like LGBTQ specialist groups, young people's groups, groups in Arabic, groups in Farsi, groups in Ukrainian. And we also offer a counselling service in English, Arabic, Farsi, and Ukrainian. And that's been really important. Again, it's like the projects are all separate, but actually they're all working together, because the idea of that was, you know, equipping people with everything, with the things that they need in a holistic way, so that they could continue with their education and continue moving forward with their lives and recover from trauma and essentially just get on with their lives in the UK.
Colette, how many staff are you doing this with? Because as far as I'm aware, you are working on a budget of about 120 grand a year. Is that right? This is a huge amount to offer for such a small turnover. How do you cope?
We have an incredible nationwide body of volunteers, and there's absolutely no way that we would be able to offer what we do without them. We have about 450 active volunteers. So largely those are people delivering our English and Befriending programme, which is reaching about 400 learners per year with one staff member. And then we have just a really efficient team. Everyone on our team is quite young, very active, very engaged in our mission. And we kind of keep stripped back costs. So everyone is really delivering services. We don't really have like an admin team, or we currently don't have a fundraiser either. It's just we will just basically do a lot of delivery. And that has its own stresses, of course. Like, I think it was a big step for me personally to move away from actually delivering our services to being more in a CEO role, which is obviously more strategy, fundraising, team management. That was challenging, but it's kept us so effective and so dynamic and flexible that it's ended up really worth it.
What can you tell us a bit more about some of your campaigns? Because I think these are really exciting, and also how you incorporate filmmaking into a lot of what you do, bringing all of your different previous skills.
Absolutely. So essentially, we were delivering these services for a number of years. And in that time, we were working with more and more people in a very long term and very close capacity. And we were seeing the political situation in the UK getting worse and worse and worse for the people that we were working with. And it got to a point where we were like, service delivery isn't actually enough if we're not also challenging the systems that are oppressing the people that we work with. So it kind of felt like delivering the services that we were delivering was like putting a plaster on a festering wound, when actually what you need to do is treat the wound. So we stepped into the storytelling and campaign space, which I see as intrinsically linked, because a massive part of our mission is around rehumanizing refugees and asylum seekers and the narrative surrounding them. And the most effective way to do that is always storytelling, and getting people to connect to people's personal stories in order to rehumanize what is otherwise kind of a very faceless issue. And we have this saying, which is that everyone has a voice, but not everyone is listened to equally. So it's not about us giving people a voice, it's just about us amplifying people's voices who have lived experience, and bringing them into the spaces that are like decision-making spaces and are kind of public spaces, putting their stories and views and experiences in front of the wider public so that people have someone to connect to in a human-to-human capacity. And we've really seen that through filmmaking that we've done. We released a documentary last year, and lots of people viewed that documentary who'd never really thought about refugees and asylum seekers before. And one of the stories in the documentary was a client that I've actually worked with for 7 years now. And he was talking about his family reunion case, which at that point had been open for 8 years, and he still hadn't been able to bring his daughter over to be with him in the UK, even after he'd been granted asylum. And lots of people were so moved by that story. And there was a point when we needed to raise some money for his legal fees, and it was done in 2 hours because people had literally seen this story, connected with him as a human being rather than as an asylum seeker, and then just were like, yeah, of course, like this guy needs to get his daughter over here. We can all connect with that. We will understand what it might be like to miss a loved one, and just like raise that money. So storytelling is really important. And for me, the way that connects into campaigns is, again, that rehumanizing the conversation. And currently we're running a couple of campaigns. One of them is around the hotels, which we've spoken a little bit about. And, you know, hotels that aren't really hotels in the way that we might imagine hotels. We hear like real horror stories coming out of these spaces in terms of, you know, lots of people who are very traumatized are expected to stay in a room together with other people that might hold some of the views that meant they had to flee their country. So, for example, we work with a lot of LGBTQ asylum seekers who face a lot of discrimination in the hotels. We work with trans women asylum seekers who are housed in all-male hotels. We work with pregnant asylum seekers who are not getting enough nutrients from the food in the hotels to give birth to their babies well. And we work with lots of people who've had their possessions confiscated by hotel staff, who have faced racism and discrimination in the hotels. And, you know, even stuff like we've seen maggots in the food. Like, it's completely not what you would expect from a package holiday hotel, for example. And so we're really trying to shift the public narrative on that. But we're also looking at the political side of this, right? And these hotels make sense for absolutely no one. They're managed predominantly by 2 massive companies in the UK, one of whom is called Clear Springs, and the only thing they do is manage initial accommodation hotels. And they made 62.9 million in profit in the year ending in January 2023. And that is entirely from government contracts. So that is just insane. That's like taxpayer money that's being used essentially for a massive company just to profit. So it doesn't make sense financially for anyone. It doesn't make sense on a human rights basis. And yeah, there's no way in which it makes sense. It's costly and it's ineffective and it's cruel. So we're campaigning against that at the moment, and that's really picked up in the wake of the race riots that we saw over the summer, because that just really evidenced how much these spaces can become a target for anti-asylum seeker and essentially racist views. So, and how unsafe they are. So we've been working with MPs since then. We've been trying to kind of work with other organisations and campaign groups to develop housing alternatives. And our big push is in shutting down the hotels by the break-in contract with these companies, which is in 2026, and providing housing within the community. So again, asylum seekers are less socially isolated, they can practice English, they can get to know people around them, and they can essentially rebuild their lives with some dignity. So that's one big campaign that we're running at the moment. And hand in hand with that is our Messages of Welcome campaign, which again started after the race riots, where I think essentially I initially posted it on my private, like personal Instagram. I was like, does anyone want to write a message of welcome that I can like give to some of the people that I work with in the hotels? And it just went a bit nuts. So I was like, okay, I need to put this on the Conversation with Borders Instagram. I did. And we had 3,000 people write in messages in the space of like a week. And I think that really shows.
A lovely campaign.
Yeah, it's so lovely. And it really shows that people are like looking for small but tangible ways that they can express welcome, like that they can show that they don't stand with the views of kind of the minority who might have the loudest voices, but actually there's a big push towards welcome.
Is there,
Yeah.
is there, or has there been a slight, or am I being very naive here, silver lining from the race rioting that happened in the summer, in that because people were so appalled by it, there's actually been more of a sense of among that it's doing nothing isn't enough. I need to show that I am appalled by that behavior. Has there been a sense of that, or is that a over hopeful thinking?
I would say that there was, I hate to call it a silver lining, I think you're right, but the benefit of it was that it brought a lot of attention to views that we knew existed, but no one really believes exist because we don't feel that it represents us, right? Like these quite extreme racist views. Most people in the UK are like, that doesn't represent me. But it brought focus on the fact that they do exist and that we need to be active in challenging them and in our anti-racism effectively. And as a result, we saw people submitting these messages of welcome. We also saw, like 20,000 people taking to the streets, 25,000 people, counter protesters taking to the streets. And someone that I work with actually said to me, and that's only the people that felt safe to, like a lot of people wouldn't have felt safety because of their identity or because of their positionality, whatever it is. But 25,000 people came out into the streets to counter protest and to say these views don't represent us. And I think we have seen a big push towards people being more aware of the issues that exist, but also being willing to kind of stand up and show that, the voices of hate don't represent the majority of us in the UK.
We will put, for everyone who's listening, we'll put the Messages of Hope campaign into the chat. And also we'll circulate it afterwards on LinkedIn and social media. So if you're interested in writing a welcome message, it's a lovely thing to do. I have to say I've done one myself and it was really, doesn't take very long and it just is a very easy way. Show how you feel, I think, and show some sort of support. It's great. But as an organisation, well, actually, no. The one thing I think, echoing your point about storytelling, tell us a story about one or two of the cases and the individuals who have really touched you, and they're the ones that you remember when things are really tough. They're the ones that you hold on to thinking, yes, but it doesn't matter. It's tough because that's what's worth it. Tell us a couple of
I think for me, it's often the people that I've known the longest because you get to see them throughout all of these different stages of life. So like, for example, oh God, I've got so many examples. Okay, so one brief example, and then I'll do another one, is that almost at the very, very beginning of Conversation Over Borders, I paired up someone called Molly, who was someone I knew from university, with someone called Javide, who had just arrived into the UK. And they are one of the pairs that still meet every single week now, just as friends, just to catch up. And Molly was traveling earlier, when was it? It was at the start of this year. And she sent me a message and she sent me a picture, and Javide had sent Molly's mum a Mother's Day card while Molly wasn't there, just to say thank you so much for raising Molly, and thank you so much for like welcoming me into your family. And that was like such a touching thing to see the impact of these long-term friendships that people really appreciate if they've arrived somewhere new without their friends or family here. But another one is someone that I knew through, so I got back involved in running our services because I was like, it's too weird for me to be too like removed from it. So now I run one of our mental health groups in Brighton is an LGBTQ group, and I met someone called Paul through that space who was an incredible individual, and I was about to ask him to come and co-facilitate the group with me, and then he got suddenly dispersed to Stevenage. And we were like, oh God, that's, it literally was like within the space of 2 sessions, he was just told that he was being moved, and then he was moved. And And I obviously remained in touch with him. And I was like, well, why don't we set up an online LGBTQ group, and you can facilitate that, and we can, you know, give you training to do that and all of this. And he has gone on to grow the biggest like support group community, like within the organization in the wellbeing service. It's got, I just checked, it's got 77 people in that group, and he has about 51 active members who come every week to this online space that he runs. And they have just all become friends. They met up in London recently and all decided to go for fish and chips. So I got lumped with a massive fish and chips bill, but I was like, this is totally worth it, because the connections that you've made through this space are so impactful. And he actually since has trained with us. We were offered some pro bono like media coaching, and he's done some training with me, and we've worked really closely together. And he's now one of our ambassadors. So he comes around to like workshops, events, and talks about his story, his experiences, and also what the power of reaching out and connecting with people is. And he's just...
That's fantastic. And so how, because you've got quite an interesting, quite a diverse funding model, how is the organisation funded? And I know you've also done quite a lot of collaborative funding tasks, which I think is a really interesting space, because particularly with funding being so challenging at the moment, it would be great.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's a very challenging fundraising time. So I just want to acknowledge that even while I'm talking about this, if anyone is struggling with fundraising at the moment, you're very much in company, I think, across the charity sector. So and also sell merch and run some events. So the events are just as much as bringing people together, but we run online cooking classes, which is always led by someone from our community. We've had 11 different countries, people from 11 different countries teach us their cuisine now. And we do that on a pay-as-you-feel basis. So some people will donate quite a lot, some people won't donate anything, and they'll just come along and cook with us, and it's really nice. But in terms of partnership funding, this is something I'm so passionate about, because when we started out, and still now really, we're a lean and grassroots organization with a very low budget, and the way that we've secured our largest grants in the past has always been through partnership work. And I think it's really important that as a sector, or as like charity leaders, we think collaboratively rather than in competition. I think there can be this weird competition for funding in the charity sector, which for me just makes no sense, because we're all trying to support people to have access to their rights and the services that they need. And we should be working together to make this, to provide the best support possible. So I see there as being kind of two sides to partnership bids that are really impactful, which is delivering a more thorough service, delivering a better quality of service, because you're working with someone else who has a different specialism, and they can provide that support to the people accessing your services. But also it really, really strengthening the bids that you're putting in. And I would really recommend people looking into partnerships in applying to bid to grants, because funders are often far more likely to fund in partnership if you are a small organization, because it essentially halves the financial risk. So 2 bank accounts, 2 financial management structures, if they're deciding to invest in you and they believe in your project, if you're a small organization with a small budget, it can be a little bit risky for them. They don't know if it's going to come, if it's going to happen, essentially, or if, you know, things might be too hit and miss. But if you are applying in partnership and you are both financially responsible for that money, it's essentially halving the financial risk for funders. And it has always enabled us to access much larger pots of money.
I think it's something that we're hearing quite a lot from the charities and social enterprises in our portfolio, is that it's achieving more results than it used to. Funders do love it, but it doesn't necessarily make it easier to do the application forms. But yeah, it's great to hear that you've had good experience with that and that it's opening up larger pots of money. But it does, I mean, how do you cope with the challenge that collaborating, it does take time, and time is clearly something that there isn't enormous amount of when you are running a grassroots organization. How do you cope with that?
Totally. And I think that's such a good point, is that it's about finding the right organizations to partner with. I think I've definitely experienced a couple of partnerships that didn't feel 100% right in the past. And I think you have to really trust your gut with kind of essentially whether you like vibe with the leaders of another organization. Because if you get on, it sounds so silly, but if you can get on and co-deliver well and hash out any problems that you might face along the way, you're going to have such a more successful experience than if there's any kind of tension there. It could just be so much more challenging. So I think it's about finding the right organizations, both the ones that make sense with the work that you deliver and that strengthen it, but also the ones where people in leadership positions are people that you can get on with and you can be honest with and say, actually, we're not going to meet this target by then. How are you doing with that? Why haven't you done this? And it just not cause any issues. And that takes time to develop. But I think it's very much worth it in terms of that dual benefit of better services and also easier funding. I think it's very much worth it. And we've got a couple of new partnerships coming up. We had one with LGBT Switchboard, which is delivering some of our LGBT work. And that's a good example because it's like they wanted to run a project with refugees and asylum seekers, but didn't have experience of doing that. We wanted to run an LGBTQ specific project, but didn't have experience of doing that. So connecting together and delivering that project together means that we get all of that joint expertise, joint kind of referral networks, joint opportunities that each of the organizations has. And it was just allowed the project to be really, really successful as a result.
Yeah. When it works really well, but I think you're right to point out and really highlight it is so vital that you like, essentially a lot of it does come down to, you respect and you trust the people that you're working with. Because there are definitely instances where, especially for small organizations, you can be used as bid candy, somebody once called it, where they know would love the fact that you've got to be working with grassroots, but they're not grassroots, and then they slightly take advantage sometimes, I think. So yeah, making sure that doesn't happen.
Totally.
The vibe is one way you can work that out. Please, anybody who's watching, do jump in with questions. But sorry, Colette, keep going.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's definitely also an experience we've had in the past. And I think there's also really practical ways that you can try and keep an eye on that. So from experiences that I've had in the past with partnerships that have been more challenging, I now am always like, regardless of who's being the lead partner, who's submitting the funding application, like I need to have eyes on that bid, of course. I need to be able to contribute into it. I need to have eyes on the budget. You can pretty quickly tell by looking at a budget if someone is throwing you in as big candy, because if they are putting anywhere less than like 40% of the money in for you when you're going to be doing 50% of the work, like you need to be able to pull that out. And sometimes if you're an organization that delivers like work to a lot of people on a low budget, like those numbers add a lot of value to someone else's bid. So it's just making sure that it's actually something that works for you as well. And yeah, just make sure that you're being assertive. And I have been in positions where I've had to be like, no, like that budget's not flying. Like this is what we're going to do. And so like taking control and not being afraid to say no as well.
Yeah, I think that is so important. And particularly, it's often really hard for small charities because you're not necessarily, you can be a bit starstruck about this big organization wants to work with us, and this is and they're very good at selling it because that's their job. But yeah, having the confidence to say no, this isn't good enough is really, really important. Because it is possible to walk away. It's not the end of the world. But no, I think that's such a challenge to sort of point out to people, is be challenging, basically. For you guys at the moment, what are the biggest things that you're facing? Obviously, the local political situation in the UK, I can imagine, might potentially have some stories of hope in change of government and potential for things to shift. Although, it looks like funding is not really going to be part of that, but also the more global political situation. How is that affecting you, and is that playing into the biggest challenges you've got at the moment?
Yeah, no, it certainly is. I think it's kind of, as you've identified, both national and international situations. We have been holding out a little bit to see what the Labour government is going to do. And obviously, it has the potential to be a positive shift, but unfortunately, what we've been seeing so far is not really moving in the direction that we would like it to. So, for example, when they made their statement on immigration, what they were going to be planning to do, the plan is increase deportations and increase detention. So they've reopened 2 detention centres that were shut down under the Tory government, and have plans to move people in there. And although we've seen some really positive steps, so like the ending of the Rwanda plan, the closure of Bibi Stockholm in January, which is the barge that people were being housed on, unfortunately, the language that we're seeing, the narrative that we're seeing is like purely financial. So how these programs are a massive, massive waste of money, which we know. But it's got nothing to do with the infringement on people's human rights, which is what we would like to be seeing prioritized a bit more, or like the international human rights commitments that we have as a country. We'd like to see those recognized a little bit more. But I think what we're seeing is a government that's operating in a landscape where they are not certain of public opinion, or that they think public opinion in general is anti-immigration. So they're trying to make decisions that look purely financial while also making some smaller changes that are actually quite positive. So we're seeing an increased focus on safeguarding of the people that we're working with, which is desperately needed, because we've for a long time been working with a Home Office that won't really take safeguarding seriously. So if we're reporting in like abuse in this hotel, or conditions that are unlivable, it'll be like, we'll get back to you in 28 working days, and then nothing actually happens. Whereas now what we're seeing under the Labour government is the Home Office being more proactive. So getting back to us quicker, moving people if they need to be moved, considering identity in safeguarding as well, which is something we've never seen before. So if we're working, for example, with a trans client who's particularly vulnerable if they were to be homeless, they're like actually being more proactive with handling that. So small movements, we'd like to see bigger ones, but perhaps we're moving in the right direction. We would like to see detention centres closed down, but that's an entirely different matter altogether. I would say internationally, the context that we're seeing across the Middle East and parts of Africa, but particularly in the Middle East at the moment, is a very legitimate, obviously a massive concern. It's incredibly distressing. And on one hand, it's incredibly distressing for everyone that we work with, who's like losing family, seeing the destruction of their homes, feeling incredibly traumatized. And so on a really practical basis, obviously that means that we've had to massively ramp up our mental health support and deliver specialized sessions, courses around like recovering from experiences of racism, how like somatic, dealing with trauma in the body, just massively ramping up that support, which is obviously not something we have resourced, but it's just something we have to do. And then, I mean, slightly longer term, essentially what we're anticipating is a massive increase in the number of people that are claiming or like attempting to claim asylum in the UK, but coming through irregular routes, quote unquote, because visa schemes don't exist. So we're seeing a push for a Palestinian family reunion visa at the moment, but it's not getting much traction at all. And visa schemes for people coming from Palestine, amongst other places, are currently non-existent. So what we're anticipating is that lots of people are going to be attempting to come to the UK through irregular routes, sometimes called illegal routes, essentially small boat and other ways of getting here. And again, that's massively traumatizing. and also is going to put a pressure on initial accommodation. So we're wondering how that's going to play out. Obviously, that links directly into our campaign. And we're concerned that what we're going to see with this movement into reopening detention centres is people increasingly being detained upon arrival rather than processed in the UK and deported and processed externally to the UK. So that's a real concern at the moment, as we've done for Ukraine and in part as we've done for Afghanistan. But yeah, clearly identifying that there's a real humanitarian need for visa routes.
Do you, there's a good question in the chat, but I'm going to ask mine first. Are there some things that you think if only small changes that the government could be making and isn't in this area that you're really frustrated by, because actually, there are things that sort of, bottlenecks that could be unblocked quite easily, and they won't solve the whole problem. That's obviously a much longer piece of work that needs to be done. But are there small things that you just think,
yeah, yeah, yeah. So we have, we have to have short-term goals as long as long-term goals. Yeah. And there's certain things that's like low-hanging fruit that the government could just decide to do differently. So, for example, obviously we're pushing for closure of hotels, but in the interim, we'd like to see people's identities considered a bit more in terms of where they're housed. So something that our lived experience campaign group have come up with that they discuss a lot is just housing LGBTQ people together so that they can then access like LGBTQ specific support, even if that is in a different hotel. Just being a little bit more proactive about considering people's identities so they're not facing the same discrimination that they face in their countries of origin. I think what we are seeing with the Labour government is an increased pace of processing people. They're really trying to clear the backlog of asylum cases. We're seeing more asylum cases pushed through. That's amazing. That's really great. We're seeing countries being greenlit, but also what we're seeing as a result of that is increased homelessness. So what we need to see is an extension on the 28-day limit that people currently have for finding somewhere else to live once they have their asylum status. So usually what happens is people are given 28 days. It can be much shorter than that, depending when they actually receive their letter saying that they've got refugee status. And in that time, they have to register for UC or find a job, get together a deposit and find somewhere private to rent. And obviously that's just impossible. I don't know anyone that's managed to move house in 28 days, regardless of their situation. So we need to see an extension of that time so that people have a longer window to figure out their next step. And at the same time, we need to see a limit placed on the amount of time that people can be held in detention centres, because currently that is, there's no cap. Like it can just, you just go in and it's like having a prison sentence, but you don't know when it's due to end. And that's a massive infringement of human rights. Obviously, we see a massive increase in suicide rates in detention centres and real mental health crises. And what we're advocating for with detention action at the moment is a 28-day limit, so that if people are going to be detained, obviously what we'd like to see is no detention centres, but if people are going to be detained, then they should know that that's going to be for a maximum of 28 days and that they have to be, either removed or allowed for their case to go forward from that point. So it's like it's essentially just about limitations or extensions of limitations so that people have more opportunity to kind of not end up destitute and having mental health crises within the current system. And then obviously longer term, we'd like to see an overhaul of the system altogether.
It's so frustrating to hear that there are some quite simple things that can be done that can make a huge difference. But it sounds like there are attempts to make some of those changes, which is good, while the longer term stuff is being sorted out. We have a question from Scott Redding. Thank you, Scott, about what experience do you have fundraising from companies, and particularly tech companies, donating towards digital skills projects and services?
Yeah, that's a really great question, Scott. I would say in terms of fundraising money, our only main corporate partner is Ben & Jerry's, who do a lot of work in the refugee and asylum seeker rights sector in the UK. All Ben & Jerry's across the various different countries that they work in have like a country focus. So the focus in the UK is refugees and asylum seekers. And that's been really effective, but I wouldn't say it's the same as a normal corporate partnership because they already have a social activism arm. A lot of companies are not that open to giving money to organisations supporting refugees and asylum seekers because it is such a politically loaded area of work. But in terms of other support, so companies donating tech, that's been a really effective angle for us. And the way that we have done that and built those partnerships is always by presenting it as an opportunity rather than a donation. So for us, we've had so many seemingly random organizations donate tech to us, like from lawyers' offices, solicitors, to companies like Trusted House Sitters, companies like tech companies, various different companies. I'm struggling to bring them all to mind now, but really varied, because when we approach companies, we say, we've got this great solution to your e-waste needs. It costs you to get rid of your e-waste. We know you update your company tech every year, and you're also paying for data erasure. Whereas we can take that tech off your hands, we can raise it all of data for you to NATO approved standards. We can then refurbish that in-house. We can provide you data destruction certificates, data erasure certificates, and then we can redistribute that out to people that don't have access to tech. And it becomes a lovely little CSR project for them, while also saving them a ton of work and getting rid of their e-waste properly. And we'll do a little report back and say where the laptops went and provide a testimony, and just build those really good relationships that are beneficial to the company as well. And it's not that we're very, very grateful to for donations of items. It's always about presenting it as an opportunity rather than a cost. And regardless of who you're approaching and for what, like, you can do that, even if it's just leaning into their CSR arm and saying, this is what we do. We're happy to provide you with this. If you're able to fund some of our work, we can provide you with volunteering opportunities for your staff. We could do talks about what we do. We could provide you with some really nice case studies and work that you can send around to everyone in the office. Whatever it is, you're presenting an opportunity for them to up their social engagement, basically. And obviously it comes with benefit for you as a charity.
We've had some great messages in the chat, which we will save and forward on to you, Colette. But Anna Waters is doing similar things with participatory visual arts at the Wave of Welcome. She's keen to talk to you. And we have Ben from I Speak Football that says he's running a program that uses sport to support learning, to support refugees in English, building connections and increasing confidence. He'd love to know what you are finding with those individuals who've been displaced, what their needs are, and how they might support. And he's very keen also to that through a potential collaboration. But just on the first part, do you want to just give a quick answer before, because I'm very aware of time. We could go on talking for hours, but I think that will probably have to be answered.
Yeah. Is that just about kind of what the difficulties for people who've been dispersed are? Is that the question that you're referring to, Mary?
Yes, but Ben, would you like to come on camera if you want to jump on and ask the question direct?
Yes, thanks. Yeah, great. Like, as I said, just very interesting to hear Colette, and just to say, like, I lived in Brighton for a long time, and left, and obviously I sort of know all about the the solidarity networks and everything, but this is an amazing program that I hadn't been aware of, and now I've been working with refugees for a while. But yeah, was just wanting to sort of understand a little bit more, because obviously you're seeing a lot of people who are sort of being dispersed, and would love to sort of know the networks that you have, but also about what those people are sort of finding at the moment, because obviously, we can talk about, integration, but there's a lot around like trying to access work, which is obviously very difficult. Obviously training, education, all of those kind of barriers that they face. So I'd just love to know a little bit more. Of course, you guys are supported on digital and mental health, and obviously that's something that we focus on as well. But would love to know a little bit more about what you've found.
Yeah, I think so. For people that are being, thank you for the question, by the way. And your project sounds phenomenal. I really love sports projects that work with anyone really, but I found it such an effective way to build community amongst people when we've referred people out to football teams and stuff like that. So really important work. I think that partly is what we're seeing when people are dispersed. It's this fact that they might have built up local connections, local services that they're aware of. But if someone's being moved every couple of months around the country, they will have built those connections and then they're broken, and then they'll try and find them in a new place and then they're broken. And it's a really distressing thing for people because they're being uprooted over and over again, which is obviously something that's already happened for them from their home countries. And it's fundamentally unfair. I think anything that builds community is the biggest thing that we have people asking for. So anything like local volunteering opportunities, local football teams, whatever it is, places where they can meet people. And because we do work with refugees, but we work with a lot of asylum seekers who've quite recently arrived. We do see a lot of right to work kind of disputes, and also people trying to get the right to work after they've been here a year, but that only being available to them for very, very specific jobs and specific sectors, which is a real struggle for people because obviously they are at risk of destitution a lot of the time. But once people have refugee status and have the secure right to work, it is about then the fact that they've been in the process for a number of years and can quite often feel de-skilled and also like they've lost a lot of confidence. So I think anything that builds like community solidarity, skills people in the meantime, and also that just continues having a structure. I think one of the biggest impacts that we see to mental health is that people lose structure during that time because they can't legally work. They kind of don't have often the resources to go and do like loads of tons of fun courses or things like that. So it's about kind of maintaining some element of structure, and for a lot of people that's volunteering, that's college, that's whatever it is, football clubs. But yeah, trying to keep that kind of structure going so that when people do have the legal right to work, they feel better able to step into jobs in the UK. And I think anything that builds up employment skills in the meantime, even stuff like supporting people with writing CVs so that they're ready to go once they have refugee status, is really important, because a lot of the refugee employment services that we see only work with people once they've already got their refugee status. And obviously that's the point where they need to be like stepping into a job, not like beginning to write a CV. So I think, it's about being proactive before people get their status. As well. I really don't know if that answered your question. I feel like I went on a ramble, but I hope it was helpful.
I bet I hope that was helpful. I have just remembered an organisation that, Colette, I will definitely tell you about, and I will also try and put it in the chat if it's helpful. We met, a newly set up business. I met them about a few months ago, which is basically offering online training to specifically aimed at refugees and asylum seekers who are being trained up in skills that they know, a lot of it is digital skills that are being needed by companies. So they partner with some specific companies that say, look, we are going to need 10 or 100 new coders who are able to do this in future. Here is a training program. Please will you offer it to people for free so that we will then have people to choose from to employ for this job. And it sounds like there might be quite a lot of organizations on this call who would be interested in this business, which I can't remember the name of at the moment, but I will find out and I will post on LinkedIn if anybody wants to follow us. Who is really interested, so that you can see it. But it sounds like you, Colette, would be really interested in sharing that potentially with some of your lots of your cohorts. But it is 2 minutes now to 2, so I'm going to say, Colette, thank you so much indeed. I hope everyone will agree that this has been really, yeah, you're so inspiring. It's so interesting what you're doing. It is incredibly, yeah, it's moving and it's impactful and it's fantastic. Would you like to just leave us with some quick asks? Obviously, the Messages of Hope campaign. Are you looking for volunteers? Are you what? Yeah. How can anyone who might be interested help?
Yeah. By the way, sorry if there's a lag on my side. Thank you so much. I would say my asks are to drop me an email. I've been reading through some of the comments in the chat, but all of you sound like you have such interesting projects, and famously, I love collaborating. So please do email me. I'll put my email in the chat. There's some really, really cool projects in there, and I'd love to have a chat about how we could work together. So that's call to action number 1. Call to action number 2, write us a message of welcome. We'll hand deliver them to people that are seeking asylum and in initial accommodation hotels. And we've had the most incredible feedback from people who've been receiving them. I was actually giving a couple out at one of the groups that I do yesterday with people who've literally just arrived into the UK in the last 2 weeks, and it was so special. It can be really short, it doesn't need to be long, but yeah, please write us a message, give it a share so that more people can. And if you ever want to volunteer on our English and befriending team, that's something that we're always looking for. So more people that just want to meet up with someone once a week online, someone that they might not otherwise meet, practice English conversation together. Again, the link to sign up for that is on our website, but feel free to shoot me an email.
Colette, thank you so much indeed. We hope that you have a lovely, relaxing afternoon and a very happy weekend. And everybody who's been listening, thank you for your really, really fantastic interventions into the chat and questions. And obviously, Colette is very keen to talk to you all. So we will make sure that if you've put your message in there, she gets it. And also we will share, Colette, if you want to share your email address now before everyone leaves, that would be great. But otherwise, thank you very much. She's also, Colette is freely available on LinkedIn. Am I okay in saying that, Colette? So, oh, brilliant. There's your email address. So if you haven't got that. Right. Thanks very much, everybody. Happy weekends and thank you. Goodbye.